Picture this: a black man in a perfectly tailored suit, briefcase in hand, walking down a busy street in broad daylight. Within seconds, two police cruisers screech to a halt. Officers jump out, hands on their weapons, shouting orders. The man raises his hands, confused, asking what he's done wrong. You match a description. One officer barks, forcing him against a brick wall as morning commuters slow their pace, pulling out phones to record what's about to unfold. But what these officers don't know, what they're about to discover in the most shocking way possible, is that the man they're humiliating, searching, and treating like a criminal is someone who holds more power in that city's justice system than they could ever imagine. What happens next will make you question everything you think you know about respect, authority, and the way we judge people by the color of their skin rather than the content of their character. Before we dive into this incredible story that shook an entire police department and went viral across the nation, take just a second to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear the story, and subscribe to support this channel. Your support helps us bring these important stories to light. This is the story of Judge Michael Andrews, and the day he taught an entire police force a lesson they'll never forget. Judge Michael Andrews wasn't supposed to be walking to work that Tuesday morning in September. His usual driver had called in sick, and his car was in the shop getting serviced. At 52 years old, with 23 years of experience on the bench, Judge Andrews was one of the most respected figures in the Detroit judicial system. He had worked his way up from nothing. Born in the projects of East Detroit, to a single mother who cleaned office buildings at night and worked at a grocery store during the day, Michael Andrews understood struggle. He understood what it meant to be looked at with suspicion simply because of where you came from, how you dressed, or the color of your skin. But education had been his escape route. Full scholarship to Michigan State, law degree from Harvard, top of his class. He'd spent years as a public defender, fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves before being appointed to the bench by the governor himself. Judge Andrews had presided over thousands of cases. He'd sent criminals to prison and given second chances to those who deserved them. He'd mediated divorces, settled business disputes, and made decisions that affected thousands of lives. In his courtroom, he was known for being fair, firm, and incredibly knowledgeable about the law. But on this particular morning, none of that mattered. As he walked down Madison Avenue toward the courthouse, dressed in his best charcoal gray suit, Italian leather shoes polished to perfection, carrying his leather briefcase containing the files for that day's cases, Judge Andrews looked like exactly what he was, a successful professional heading to work. The morning sun cast long shadows between the buildings. Early commuters hurried past, coffee cups in hand, lost in their own worlds. It was 7:43 a.m., and the city was just beginning to wake up. Judge Andrews enjoyed these rare moments of solitude, the quiet before the storm of a busy day in court. He was reviewing his mental notes for the morning's docket when he heard the screech of tires behind him. Officer David Martinez, a 6-year veteran of the Detroit Police Department, had been having a rough morning. A convenience store robbery suspect was still on the loose, a black male, approximately 5 feet 10 inches, wearing dark clothing, last seen in the downtown area. The description was vague, as they often were, but pressure from his sergeant to find anyone, who might be connected to the case was intense. When Martinez spotted Judge Andrews walking purposefully down Madison Avenue, something in his mind clicked. Black male. Check. Dark clothing. Well, the suit was dark. Check. Downtown area. Check. In Officer Martinez's mind, this was probable cause. Pull over, he told his partner, Officer Jennifer Walsh, a rookie with less than 2 years on the force. I want to talk to this guy. As their cruiser screeched to a halt, a second patrol car, driven by officers Robert Chin and Marcus Thompson, pulled up behind them. For one man walking to work. Excuse me, sir. Stop right there. Officer Martinez shouted, his hand instinctively moving to his weapon. Judge Andrews turned around, genuinely confused. He looked around to see if the officer was addressing someone else. The street was mostly empty except for a few early commuters who had now stopped to watch the scene unfold. Me, Judge Andrews asked, pointing to himself. Yes, you. Put your hands where I can see them and step away from that briefcase. The judge's heart rate increased, but his voice remained calm, a skill he'd learned from years on the bench dealing with tense situations. Officer, I think there's been some mistake. I'm just walking to work. Turn around and put your hands on the wall, Officer Martinez commanded, his voice growing more aggressive. You match the description of a suspect we're looking for. By now, a small crowd had gathered. Someone across the street pulled out their phone and started recording. A woman walking her dog stopped and stared. A businessman getting coffee from a nearby cafe turned to watch, his mouth slightly open in disbelief. Judge Andrews complied, placing his hands against the cold brick wall of the building. The indignity of the moment wasn't lost on him. Here he was, a man who had dedicated his life to upholding the law, being treated like a common criminal. What's in the briefcase? Officer Walsh asked, her nervousness evident in her voice. Legal documents, Judge Andrews replied calmly. Case files for court today. Officer Chin laughed, a sound that cut through the morning air like a knife. Sure they are. What are you, a lawyer or something? Something like that, the judge replied, maintaining his composure even as the situation grew more humiliating by the second. Officer Martinez began patting down the judge, searching his pockets, running his hands along his arms and legs in a manner that was both thorough and deliberately degrading. The crowd watching was growing larger, and the phones recording were multiplying. You got any weapons on you, boy? Officer Martinez asked, using a term that made several bystanders gasp audibly. Judge Andrews closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of history in that single word. How many times had he heard that word used as a weapon? How many cases had he presided over where dignity had been stripped away with language just like this? No, officer, he replied, his voice still steady. I don't carry weapons. What's your name? Officer Thompson asked, pulling out his notepad. Michael Andrews. Where are you going, Michael? To work. The courthouse. Officer Martinez laughed again. Oh, you work at the courthouse? What do you do, clean the bathrooms? The crowd's reaction was becoming more audible now. Someone called out, This is ridiculous. Another voice shouted, Leave him alone. But the officers continued their investigation, emboldened by their authority and seemingly oblivious to the growing outrage of the witnesses. Officer Walsh opened the briefcase and began rifling through the contents. Legal briefs, case files, judicial schedules, all the paperwork that Judge Andrews needed for his day. And these look like real legal documents, she said to her partner, a note of uncertainty creeping into her voice. Anyone can steal legal documents, Officer Martinez replied dismissively. Doesn't prove anything. For 15 minutes, this continued. 15 minutes of questioning, searching, and humiliation. 15 minutes of a respected judge being treated like a criminal while dozens of people watched and recorded. 15 minutes that would change everything. Throughout it all, Judge Andrews remained calm, polite, and compliant. He answered every question respectfully, even as his civil rights were being violated in broad daylight. He never raised his voice, never became argumentative, never did anything that could be construed as resisting or interfering with the officer's investigation. But inside, his mind was working. As someone who had spent decades in the criminal justice system, he knew exactly what was happening here. He understood the dynamics of power, the presumptions being made, and the dangerous game that was being played with his life and dignity. The crowd continued to grow. The videos continued to record, and the officers continued their harassment, unaware that they were about to experience a moment that would haunt their careers and force an entire police department to confront its own biases. All right, Officer Martinez said after what felt like an eternity. I'm going to need to see some identification. This was the moment Judge Andrews had been waiting for. Throughout the entire ordeal, he had remained calm, knowing that this moment would come. He had options. He could have identified himself immediately, could have used his position to end the harassment before it began. But he had chosen to experience this injustice fully, to understand exactly what countless other black men went through when they didn't have the protection of a judicial badge. My identification is in my inside jacket pocket, Judge Andrews said calmly. Slowly, Officer Martinez commanded. Very slowly. The crowd watched in tense silence as Judge Andrews reached into his jacket. Several people held their breath, knowing how these situations could escalate in an instant. The officers tensed, their hands moving instinctively toward their weapons. What Judge Andrews pulled out wasn't a driver's license or a state ID card. It was a leather wallet containing his judicial credentials, and prominently displayed was his official badge, the badge of a sitting judge of the Wayne County Circuit Court. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Officer Martinez's face went white. Officer Walsh took a step backward. Officer Chen's mouth fell open. Officer Thompson stopped writing in his notepad mid-sentence. Judge Andrews, Officer Martinez stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. That's correct, Judge Andrews replied, his voice still calm, but now carrying the full weight of his authority. Judge Michael Andrews, Wayne County Circuit Court, the same courthouse I was walking to when you decided to stop me. The silence that followed was deafening. The crowd that had gathered began to murmur, then talk, then exclaim in disbelief. Phones that had been recording the harassment now captured the officers' shocked faces as they realized the magnitude of their mistake. Officer Walsh was the first to find her voice. Your Honor, we didn't know. We were looking for a robbery suspect, and you saw a black man in a suit and decided he must be your suspect. Judge Andrews interrupted, his judicial tone cutting through the morning air like a gavel striking wood. Tell me, Officer Walsh, what exactly did I do that made you think I was a criminal? Was it the way I was walking? Was it my briefcase? Or was it simply the color of my skin? Officer Martinez tried to salvage the situation. Sir, Your Honor, we were just doing our job. We had a description. A description of what exactly? Judge Andrews asked, pulling out his phone and opening the voice recorder app. I want you to tell me right here, right now, what specific behaviors or characteristics made you believe I was your robbery suspect? And I want your answer on the record. The officers looked at each other, suddenly realizing that everything they said was not only being recorded by the judge, but by dozens of bystanders whose videos were likely already being uploaded to social media. Officer Chen stepped forward, trying to take control of the situation. Your Honor, perhaps we could discuss this privately. No, Judge Andrews said firmly. We're going to discuss this right here, right now, in front of all these witnesses who just watched you humiliate a man for walking to work. These are the same people who watched you call me boy, who watched you assume I clean bathrooms, who watched you treat me like a criminal for the crime of being black in a business suit. The crowd was now actively engaged, with many people calling out support for the judge and expressing their outrage at what they had witnessed. Someone shouted, "Tell them, Judge." Another voice called out, "This is exactly what's wrong with the system." Officer Martinez made one final attempt to minimize the situation. Your Honor, if we had known who you were. Stop, Judge Andrews commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had controlled courtrooms for over 2 decades. Right there. If you had known who I was. Do you understand what you just said? You're telling me that your treatment of me was acceptable as long as I wasn't someone important. You're telling me that respect and dignity are privileges reserved for those with power and position. The officer's face reddened as he realized the trap he had walked into. Let me ask you something, Officer Martinez. Judge Andrews continued. If I had been a white man in a suit carrying a briefcase and walking to work, would you have stopped me? Would you have put me against this wall? Would you have called me boy and asked if I cleaned toilets? The silence stretched on as Officer Martinez realized there was no good answer to that question. But Judge Andrews wasn't finished. What happened next would transform this encounter from a simple case of racial profiling into a teachable moment that would resonate far beyond that street corner in Detroit. Instead of losing his temper, instead of demanding apologies or threatening consequences, Judge Michael Andrews did something that no one expected, including the officers who had just humiliated him. He took a deep breath, looked at each officer individually, and then addressed them with the same dignity and respect he brought to his courtroom every day. "Officers," he began, his voice steady and professional, "I want you to understand something. I'm not angry with you. I'm disappointed, but I'm not angry, because anger won't solve the problem we're facing here today." The crowd quieted down, sensing that something profound was about to happen. What happened here this morning happens to black men across this country every single day. The only difference is that most of them don't have a judicial badge to flash when things go too far. Most of them don't have the protection that comes with being a judge. The teachers, mechanics, doctors, students, fathers walking their children to school, men going to job interviews, grandfathers getting groceries. Officer Walsh was visibly emotional now, tears forming in her eyes as the weight of what had transpired began to sink in. "I've spent 23 years on the bench," Judge Andrews continued, "and I've seen the consequences of unconscious bias played out in my courtroom thousands of times. I've seen how assumptions and stereotypes destroy lives, break up families, and perpetuate cycles of injustice." He paused, looking directly at Officer Martinez. "When you call me boy, officer, you weren't just disrespecting me. You were channeling centuries of racism and dehumanization. When you assumed I cleaned toilets instead of practicing law, you were revealing unconscious biases that affect every interaction you have with people who look like me." The judge's phone was still recording, and the crowd was hanging on every word. "But here's what I'm going to do," Judge Andrews said, his voice taking on a tone of determination. "Instead of filing a complaint, instead of demanding disciplinary action, instead of turning this into a media circus that destroys your careers, I'm going to make you an offer." The officers looked at each other, uncertain about what was coming next. "Next Friday at 2 p.m., I want all four of you in Courtroom 7B at Wayne County Circuit Court. I'm going to conduct a seminar on unconscious bias, racial profiling, and community policing. It's not going to be a punishment. It's going to be an education. And I don't just want you four there. I want your sergeant, your lieutenant, and any other officers who want to learn how to do their jobs better." Officer Thompson found his voice. "Your Honor, you want us to attend a seminar that you're conducting?" "That's exactly what I want," Judge Andrews replied, "because this isn't about punishment. This is about prevention. This is about making sure that what happened here today doesn't happen to the next black man walking down this street. This is about turning a moment of injustice into an opportunity for growth and understanding." He looked around at the crowd that had gathered. "And I want all of you to come too," he said to the bystanders. "Community policing only works when the community is involved. We need to have honest conversations about bias, about assumptions, about the way we treat each other." Officer Martinez stepped forward, his voice barely audible. "Your Honor, I owe you an apology. What we did here today was wrong, and I'm ashamed of my behavior." Judge Andrews nodded. "Officer Martinez, your apology is accepted, but apologies without action are just words. The question is, what are you going to do differently tomorrow?" What happened next exceeded everyone's expectations. Officer Walsh pulled out her phone and opened her department's social media app. "Your Honor," she said, "would you mind if I share what you just said with our entire department? I think everyone needs to hear this." "I think that's an excellent idea," Judge Andrews replied. Within hours, the videos from that morning had gone viral. But unlike many viral videos of police encounters, this one had a different ending. Instead of anger and division, it sparked conversations about unconscious bias, community policing, and the power of turning conflict into collaboration. The seminar that Judge Andrews proposed became a monthly event. Officers from departments across Michigan began attending. Community leaders, civil rights activists, and ordinary citizens joined the conversations. The Detroit Police Department eventually adopted Judge Andrews' approach as part of their standard bias training. Officer Martinez, who had initially profiled the judge, became one of the program's most passionate advocates. He later told reporters, "Judge Andrews taught me that being a good cop isn't just about enforcing the law. It's about treating every person with dignity and respect, regardless of what they look like or where they come from. The video of the encounter, including Judge Andrews' response, was eventually viewed over 15 million times. It was shared by police departments as a training tool, used in criminal justice classes across the country, and cited in academic research on bias and community policing. But perhaps the most powerful impact was on the individuals who witnessed the encounter that morning. Several people in the crowd later said that watching Judge Andrews respond with grace and wisdom instead of anger and indignation changed their own perspective on how to handle conflict and injustice. 3 months after the incident, Judge Andrews received a letter from a young black man named Marcus Williams. Marcus had been stopped by police the week before while walking home from his job at a local bank. But instead of the encounter escalating, the officers who stopped him recognized him as a community member, treated him with respect, and even offered him a ride home when they learned he was walking because his car had broken down. "Your Honor," Marcus wrote, "I don't know if those officers had seen your video or attended your seminar, but something was different about how they treated me. They saw me as a person, not as a threat. Thank you for showing all of us that change is possible." The story of Judge Michael Andrews teaches us something profound about the power of responding to injustice with wisdom rather than anger, with education rather than retaliation, with hope rather than despair. But let's be clear about something. Judge Andrews had the privilege of position that protected him from the worst possible outcomes of that encounter. His judicial badge was his shield. His education was his armor. His status was his protection. Not everyone who experiences racial profiling has those advantages. The tragedy is that for every Judge Andrews who can transform a moment of bias into a teachable moment, there are countless others who don't have that platform, that protection, or that power. There are teachers, students, mechanics, doctors, and ordinary citizens who experience the same humiliation and injustice without the ability to turn it into something positive. That's where we come in. Every single person watching this video has a role to play in creating the kind of society where skin color doesn't determine how you're treated by those sworn to protect and serve. Every one of us can speak up when we witness profiling, whether it's subtle or obvious. Every one of us can challenge our own unconscious biases and examine our own assumptions about people who don't look like us. When you see something that doesn't look right, when you witness someone being treated unfairly because of their race, their appearance, or their circumstances, don't just pull out your phone to record. Speak up. Be a witness. Use your voice to advocate for justice. Support community policing initiatives in your area. Attend town halls. Vote for leaders who prioritize police reform and bias training. Engage in conversations about race and justice, even when they're uncomfortable. And remember, respect and dignity aren't privileges to be earned. They're rights that belong to every human being, regardless of their status, their position, or the... Judge Andrews understood that real change doesn't come from anger or retaliation. It comes from education, understanding, and the courage to transform moments of injustice into opportunities for growth. The question is, what will you do with your opportunities? If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it inspired you to be part of the solution, then share it. Like this video. Subscribe to this channel so we can continue bringing you stories that matter, stories that challenge us to be better, stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Because ultimately, that's what Judge Andrews' story is about, our shared humanity and our collective responsibility to treat each other with the dignity and respect that every person deserves. The change starts with us. The change starts with you. The change starts now. What will your next encounter look like? How will you choose to see and treat the people you meet? Will you look beyond skin color to see character? Will you look beyond assumptions to see truth? Will you look beyond stereotypes to see the human being standing in front of you? Judge Michael Andrews showed us the way. Now it's our turn to follow his example and create a world where walking to work while black, or being different in any way, isn't a crime punishable by humiliation and harassment. The courtroom of public opinion is now in session, and we're all both judge and jury in determining What kind of society we'll create together? What's your verdict?